All throughout League's tenure, as new champions are being released, old champions are getting updated at a commensurate rate. These reworks were intended to modernize outdated cast members in the hopes to include more skill expression, agency, and gameplay enjoyment not just for the person playing them, but for the person playing against them. Reworks come in all sizes, ranging from a small adjustment to one of their abilities to full reimaginings of their gameplay and moveset. While there may have been moments in time where a champion came out of a rework with a new set of problems, never has Riot been forced to backpedal on a VGU or midscope update, implying reworks always resulted in a net positive outcome, even if there are some janks that needed to be fine-tuned a bit. Or should I say all reworks except one? Leblanc has been around since basically the beginning of the game, a hybrid between mage and assassin who excels in breaking her opponent's ankles and blasting enemies before dipping out of the fight as quickly as she came in. Widely considered one of the most difficult champions to shut down when played correctly, she's been a mainstay in mid to high elo for her strong yet safe gameplay, but her linearity and susceptibility to being countered too easily has left Riot wondering if they could improve her a bit, resulting in a gameplay overhaul during the assassin class rework way back in Season 7. But after not even a year and a half of her new version, backlash towards the new design was so severe that Riot issued a full reversion to her previous state, a decision not made before in the history of League, or since. In today's episode of the Rework Retrospective, we'll be covering LeBlanc and why her midscope was a total disaster. Unlike every other episode in this series, I actually want to start by discussing the current LeBlanc, or rather old I should say. While most would call her an assassin owing to her high burst damage and evasion, I would actually deem her more of a burst mage. What distinguishes the two classes from each other is that assassins play to overwhelm and destroy you in a single combo, whereas burst mages, while they can also do that, are usually more trade-oriented than actual one-shotting. For example, Ahri's also a burst mage with high mobility through her ultimate, but you typically don't see an Ahri taking a full health bar 100 to 0 in a single combo. She usually chunks you down to half and then finishes you off not too long after. She can also burst you without having to commit to a full combo. Further, assassins tend to be melee champions, emphasizing their all-in committal playstyle. That being said, LeBlanc indeed feels like an assassin more than a mage, owing to her trademark one-shot combos. Chief among them would be her staple double sigil combo, wherein she would use her Q to damage and mark you, then use her ultimate to cast another copy of her Q, which detonates the mark and reapplies a new one. Then she would follow up with either distortion or ethereal chains to proc the second mark before recasting W to run away. Very straightforward, but it can deal a huge amount of damage in a short time, hence why people call her an assassin. A noteworthy aspect of LeBlanc's skin, however, is what else she can do besides bursting enemies. Normally, when assassins try to engage on you, for how fast their engage might be, you have a shot at responding to them before they nuke you or while they nuke you since they're melee. Oftentimes, if an assassin has to engage on you, they can't escape easily if you somehow manage to survive. Either or both factors are what balances the assassin class. LeBlanc was able to circumvent this in two ways. One, she's a ranged champion, letting her blow you up without having to stand right next to you, which automatically affords her an overwhelming advantage against melee targets. Two, she doesn't have to commit to a full engage, or rather she has the choice not to, giving her the option to mix up her combos by forcing her opponents to always expect that she could retreat, even though she doesn't have to. In spite of her linear playstyle, the sheer range of option selection given to her made her very frustrating to deal with, as it felt like at any point in time she could make you disintegrate, while making it ambiguous as to where and when her point of vulnerability would be. LeBlanc is able to bait out your panic options or committal moves, then punish you for doing so, all while being a ranged champion who can continuously harass and poke you into making that attempt. Understandably, depending on who you're playing, she's one of the most annoying champions to go up against. Conversely, however, LeBlanc's penchant for deception was kept in check by her inherent limitations as a burst mage, not an assassin. People often remark on how assassins become useless if they fall behind everyone else in the early game, and while that is true, they usually still have a way to impose pressure. Even if a Talon or a Rengar is behind, you still have to respect them one-shotting the enemy squishy. But for LeBlanc, it almost feels like she can't really do anything when behind, including one-shotting the squishy, because her burst range or damage isn't as fast or difficult to respond to as the likes of Talon and Rengar. Those two are rushdown champs who can blitz you from across the map at a moment's notice. LeBlanc's more of a hit and runner. As you can see, there are problems with the champion on both ends. People express frustration when playing against her, and frustration when playing her, prompting Riot to include her in the assassin class rework in pre-season 7, hoping to achieve the two goals of making her feel more rewarding to play, as well as making her opponents feel like they have ways to deal with her. The end result, however, proved to leave her in a situation more disastrous than where she previously was. The objective of her midscope was twofold: one, to give her ways to contribute for her team regardless of how fed or behind she was, and two, to give opponents a clear opportunity in responding against her. On paper, it seemed like they've accomplished what they set out to do, but in practice it ended up being a one step forward, two steps back sort of thing. Allow me to explain. Sigil of Mouse was brought to her passive, more specifically the mark portion of her Q. After 1.5 seconds of being damaged by one of her abilities, taking a second ability would cause enemies to sustain significant bonus damage, just like the original passive. However, it didn't specify that it had to be her Q anymore. For example, Leblanc could W a target then use E to proc the mark, making it so all parts of her kit could not only detonate Sigil of Mouse, but apply it as well. This enabled her to exert pressure on more enemies at the same time, since in theory, and very often in practice, she could do her full burst combo against multiple enemies. In exchange for her Q mark moving to her passive, her Q was renamed to Shadow Orb and given a new secondary property, wherein if it triggered her passive, it would also bounce to all other nearby enemies who also had a mark on them and explode them all, identical to Rai's Q detonating all of their spellflux marks on enemies beyond the first. One aspect of LeBlanc that was always considered a weak point was how poor her wave clear was for a mage. She would only be able to push a wave by using distortion, but doing so would leave her unable to do much else until her W came off cooldown. Not to mention that going in to clear the wave would expose her very easily, which goes against the whole premise of LeBlanc being unpredictable. Technically, she still has to W the wave in order to tag everyone with their passive, but it doesn't take up the bulk of her DPS anymore. On that note, the only change to distortion was that it lost a ton of damage. Current Leblanc's W is the strongest single instance of damage in her kit, but Rework Leblanc's W was the weakest part, naturally of course, on account of her passive being a damaging ability. What she would do is distortion the wave, then wait for the mark to activate, and then Q it to explode everything. The rest of LeBlanc's kit remained just about the same, with the only adjustment being that her clone property was attached to her ultimate and would copy the same ability she did so that you could decide how to use a clone. Doesn't seem like that much of a difference between old and new, right? Well, unfortunately, that one change to her passive and Q made a lot of difference to how LeBlanc played. In her defense, the initial goal of trying to give LeBlanc more options and give enemies more time to respond was technically successfully met. Sigil of Malice alone takes up a solid third of her damage, if not more. With the 1.5 second activation, no matter what combination of abilities she uses, you had that amount of time to at least initiate a counterattack. As for more options, LeBlanc's entire value was no longer based on if she could one-shot someone important. If anything, she became more of a control mage thanks to her vastly improved wave clearing ability and the new role her E and ultimate served. Ethereal Chains had a 100% AP ratio to it, making landing both parts of it integral, especially since the second tick of damage would automatically proc her passive in light of it being 1.5 seconds to activate as well. She had the option to slow down enemy tempo and disrupt any plays they tried to make. Also, now that she could spawn a clone on demand and anywhere around the map, LeBlanc had a ton of implied macro pressure, as she could appear on two parts of the map at the same time, with the enemy team being none the wiser to who was the real one. Worst case scenario, she could always just push waves and hold the line that way. So how did things go wrong for her then? To put it simply, the new options they gave her meant she could pressure you in more ways, ultimately rendering the increased window of counterplay inconsequential, considering even if you could shut her down in this way, you now had to find a way to shut her down in all the other new ways. Arguably the biggest issue with their failed rework was that she could now burst down targets without having to commit at all. While Distortion's Blink Out gave you a very small window to attack her without lockdown, at least you had a window. Compared to most dash abilities, LeBlanc's W has a pretty lengthy cooldown even at rank 5, meaning if she used it to dash in, even if she blinked out, you could still chase her down for a bit. Now that Distortion wasn't necessary for dealing damage, LeBlanc could endlessly pelt you with Qs and Es and save her W just to kite you in circles. Landing a single chains on you would do 180% of her AP in scaling damage alone, not even counting the base damage, so she could just QE or EQ and one-tap you that way. This also coincided around the time when Hextech Gunblade was still in the game, even more free damage, not to mention Spell Vamp. Yes, there was a 1.5 second window to figure out a response, but what they failed to do was actually give you a response. Most melee champions couldn't do a thing against her, as even those who could dash towards her would get kited anyway. Landing two abilities with LeBlanc, one of which being a point and click, would cause you to take 735 plus 230% AP. 1.5 second delay, yeah, you had 1.5 seconds to contemplate your life before she killed you. Keep in mind, LeBlanc's effective range on her Q and D was 700 and 900 respectively. She could easily attack and kite out even 80 carries, all while two-shotting them while they needed to attack her several times to mete out punishment of equal magnitude. Also keep in mind that I'm just mentioning her Q and E, not the fact that she still has her ultimate, which allows her to recast one of her basic abilities for even more damage. This was all in addition to her new privilege of becoming Rise. Shadow Orb in conjunction with Sigil of Malice was so strong it could even kill melee minions. LeBlanc's WQ combo would wipe out an entire wave, preventing you from counteracting her by abusing her one support neutral game. She now had one of the best neutral games among the cast. She had the strongest 2 ability trade combo by a wide margin, Q and E. She had some of the best wave clear, especially for how safe and consistent it was. And to top it off, being LeBlanc, she was obviously one of the hardest champions to gank in lane, since if push came to shove, she could use her Mimic Distortion to escape. Oh, that's right, how could I neglect to mention? You guys know how Current Leblanc's ultimate only activates the most recent basic ability you cast it, right? If you use Q and recast a Q, W and recast a W, and so on. The rework version of LeBlanc didn't have that condition. Mimic was an entire new set of abilities, which meant LeBlanc did not have to double cast an ability. She could hypothetically use Q, then W, then Q again, whereas Current Leblanc has to recast the same ability she used before, in this case QWW. That's what I meant by LeBlanc having too many new options, that a 1.5 second delay in her burst damage was not at all sufficient enough to make her fair to play against. She could spam her Q, W, and E with no regard for the order, and she would always be able to call upon the ultimate copy ability of her choice if and when it was needed. Everything I just talked about came with the addition of Hextech Gunblade, giving her near infinite sustain. People who think healing's out of control now, my friend, if only you knew Hextech Gunblade. This piece of item, even though I missed it, could basically heal you from half HP to full against a single wave, making it even harder to kill her when in between combos, LeBlanc was recovering back everything she lost. At that point, the only discernible weakness to her was her mana pool, and to be fair, that was the weakness, at least until she got a blue buff. At the same time, even in spite of all that she got, believe it or not, many LeBlanc mains were very annoyed by her new playstyle for not feeling like LeBlanc at all. It didn't make her better at outplaying or deceiving enemies, it just made her more straightforwardly broken. People enjoyed playing LeBlanc because of her high mobility, high evasion, and burst potential, but the changes to her rendered her into a hard-shoving control mage whose only real way of attacking was tossing out her E. It's the same reason people were upset about the changes to Rise around the same time. They went from high skill expression champions into nothing more than EQ spammers. LeBlanc was no longer an assassin. The point of an assassin is to burst down the enemy target in the blink of an eye, but the 1.5 second delay naturally prevented that from happening. She basically became a full-on mage, ironic when you take into account that she was part of the assassin class rework. Even though she didn't change visually, in hindsight many people felt the same way towards her that people felt towards Aatrox when he got reworked. It just wasn't LeBlanc anymore, it was someone else. As well, the changes to her kit also made it very difficult to play her well, causing it to underperform for the vast majority of players with the exception of the Apex tiers and Pro Play. You had to play her in an extremely unorthodox way to get the most out of her kit. Granted, Current Leblanc's also tough to play really well, as it takes a lot more than just a WQRE to one-tap someone. But trust me when I say LeBlanc just felt weird. She's a mage who didn't have the same tools you'd see on a mage, but then she also didn't feel like an assassin either. In totality, no one was happy with this iteration of her. Players couldn't get used to the counterintuitive delay on her burst damage and the fact that she essentially turned into Rise with mobility. All the while, opponents couldn't find a way to reliably stop her due to her strengths being just that insane. High wave clear, incredible mobility, long range, insane neutral game, infinite sustain after gunblade, macro pressure. She had everything except durability and mana. Without an easy way to make a new version work, and believe me, they tried really hard to get us to come around to her, the champion design team ultimately decided that she would have to be fully reverted. Unlike Rengar, who simply got his swim Q turned back into his old Q but kept everything else, or Zac, whose ultimate went back to the old one but he kept his new Q, LeBlanc was completely reverted. Every single aspect of her went back to the way it was, with not a single remnant of her new version surviving the reset. To this day, LeBlanc is the only champion to have been given this treatment, underscoring just how severe the community backlash was and how much of a hole Riot dug themselves in to think there was no way they could have kept going forward with it. Although, I find it ironic how since LeBlanc they went ahead with their Murderer's Row 200 years champions who feel even worse to play against than LeBlanc. But at the time, old, or new, or whatever, LeBlanc felt just as bad as how we feel towards 200 years champs now. Do you guys think they should have kept that version of LeBlanc, or do you agree that she never should have been changed to begin with? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Rework retrospective episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.